What is natural? What is naturalness? Hi, I'm Eric Steinhardt. You can learn more about me at my website, www.ericsteinhardt.com. This is spiritual atheism. This is part of my book, Believing in Dawkins, the New Spiritual Atheism. And Believing in Dawkins shows how to use Dawkins' ideas to build a new and existentially satisfying naturalistic culture. You can learn more about it at my website at the address there. It's published in September by Palgrave Macmillan. So what's the difference between science and theology? What's the difference between natural and supernatural? What's the difference? Is the difference that science uses empirical evidence while theology does not? No. The design arguments and cosmological arguments are based on empirical evidence. Is the difference that science uses logic and reasoning while theology does not? No. All the arguments for God use logic, whether they're sound or valid or not, they still use logic. And the ontological argument is an example of a purely rational argument, an argument that proceeds through pure reason. So what's the difference? Dawkins says the difference is the use of mathematics. Dawkins says, theologians may speculate about angels on pinheads. Physicists might seem to have their own angels and their own pinheads, quanta and quarks, charm, strangeness, and spin. But physicists can count their angels and get it right to the nearest angel in a total of 10 billion. Theology not only lacks decimal places, it lacks even the smallest hint of a connection with the real world. The sciences use math, but theology does not. As science makes progress, it becomes more and more mathematical. The difference between science and theology is mathematics, and so the difference between the natural and the supernatural is also mathematics. Here's how we can state it. If something is natural, then it has mathematical models. If something has mathematical models, then it's natural. To be natural is to be mathematically describable. And we'll put that in a slogan, naturalness equals mathiness. So what about science and mathiness? Science aims to accurately describe the natural world. It uses mathematics to describe the natural world. So there in science you have naturalness is mathiness. Lots of equations in science. Here's the Pythagorean Theorem. That's an attempt to describe a structure in the natural world, the structure of right triangles, geometry, space and time. We've got Newton's law of gravity that's expressible as an equation where there are force vectors, F1 and F2. There's masses, M1 and M2, which are numerical quantities. There's the radius, r squared, or actually just the distance r between the two masses, and the gravitational constant g. And so you've just got numerical quantities in mathematical or arithmetical relations with each other. The distance r squared, mass 1 multiplied by mass 2, multiplied by gravity, and you divide, right? The masses times gravitational constant divided by the square of the distance, and you get a vector. This is all math. More complicated, you got Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism, Schrodinger's equation, right, basis of quantum mechanics, Einstein's field equation in relativity, the Lotka Volterra equations in biology, right? Equations are not just for physics. Equations appear in chemistry, biology, even sciences like psychology and sociology, and of course economics. And the Lotka Volterra equations, right, they describe the relations of predator and prey. The Lepus americanus, snowshoe hare, and the lynx, the Canadian lynx, right? So cats and rabbits, right? The populations going up and down in a kind of oscillatory wave-like frame. Let's take an example. Here's Reiki. Reiki is a New Age practice in which a healer uses their hands to transfer energy of some kind, New Age energy, to their patient or to modulate the patient's energy field. And usually the healer doesn't touch the patient. So this is Reiki. It's supposed to be a technique for manipulating energy. Reiki has no equations. No equations describe the Reiki energy fields of human bodies, and no equations describe how the hands of the Reiki practitioner change the energy field of the patient. There are no differential equations illustrating or describing or modeling the flow of energy between the practitioner and the person being healed. No math is not natural. So Reiki energy fields are not natural, and Reiki energy transfer is not natural. It's not a part of nature. Here's another example, string theory, the string theory landscape, a bizarre geometrical hyperdimensional picture there on the left. The string theory landscape describes the class of possible string theoretic universes. It's not observable. If this version of string theory turns out to be true, then we live in just one tiny little part of the string theory landscape and we can't see the rest of it. No telescopes will ever reveal it. It's a structure that vastly exceeds physics, right? And if nature is just our universe, then it might seem like the string theory landscape is supernatural. So, whoa. If we look into string theory, we see equations, right? A book on string theory, Polchinski's string theory textbook. There's another set of equations from that book, right? Okay, all these equations. So string theory uses math, and if it uses math according to our principle here, then it's natural, right? Naturalness is mathiness. So the string theory landscape is natural. It's not supernatural. Naturalness. To be natural is to have a mathematical model. But watch out. No claims have been made about existence. Reiki energy fields are not natural. But that doesn't prove that they don't exist. To prove that they don't exist, you would have to make some other arguments. All we're doing here is trying to define the difference between the natural and the non-natural. We're not arguing whether or not anything exists. The string theory landscape is natural. But that does not prove that it does exist. To prove that the string theory landscape exists would require a whole series of other arguments, none of which are made here. We're just trying to decide whether or not the string theory landscape is natural or non-natural. And because it uses math, we say it's natural. That doesn't mean it exists. It might not. And of course, there are plenty of scientists who are skeptical about string theory. To be natural is to have a mathematical model. Naturalness is mathiness. But watch out again. No claims have been made about existence, specifically mathematical existence. You don't have to believe in a Platonic world of abstract mathematical objects to apply this definition of naturalness. All you have to do is look. You can see, open a Reiki book. It has no equations, no math. Open a string theory book. It has equations. It has math. This is just a simple observational test for naturalness. Open the book or look at the articles or the website. Does it use equations? Does it use math? If its objects are described by mathematical equations, if there are mathematical models of the objects, they're natural. What about astrology? Wait a minute. Astrology uses lots of math to locate the planets. Right. That part of astrology is scientific, and it's called astronomy. Astrologers do have to use astronomy to know which houses and places the planets are in. That part of astrology describes nature. But astrology does not use math to define people's personalities or predict their futures. That part of astrology is pseudoscience, and that part of astrology does not describe nature. The math part of astrology is natural. The non-math part is not natural. So here again we have an example of where naturalness is mathiness. What about psychoanalysis? There was this French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. Well, whatever Lacan was doing with his math themes, what are math themes? Well, his books are filled with these math themes. It isn't mathematics. They're like decorations or Rorschach blots. And the psychoanalyst Serge Leclerc calls them graffiti. So let's look at a couple of these. Here are a few. These kinds of things appear in Lacan's books. It has nothing to do with mathematics. These symbols are like some kind of psychoanalytic symbols that you're supposed to somehow reflect on to access the unconscious or something. Or maybe Lacan is just nonsense. So, Lacan had these equations, called them math themes, but they didn't do anything. What about creation science? Advocates of intelligent design often use math. They talk about concepts like specified complexity or irreducible complexity, and they present them in mathematical language. This is Dembski's book, William Dembski, No Free Lunch, where he talks about specified complexity and how that's an argument for intelligent design. He doesn't want to say God, but just an intelligent designer. But Dembski uses math incorrectly and often just makes stuff up. Creation science is pseudo-mathematics. Now there's science and there's going to be pseudoscience. There's math and there's going to be pseudo-math, right? There are always going to be tricksters and con artists who try to take the rigor and elegance and beauty of mathematics and distort it and pervert it and use it for their own unmathematical ends, right? Wherever there's truth, there's going to be falsity. So those kind of people exist, and we always have to be on the alert for pseudo-mathematics. Creation science is pseudo-mathematics. The only claim we're making here is that naturalness is mathiness, not pseudo-mathiness. What about natural theology? Arguments in natural theology often use math, like Bayes' theorem, to argue for God. Here's the book Probability and Philosophy of Religion, which uses lots of Bayes' theorem and probability equations to try to argue that God exists. Well, the arguments for God in natural theology may be naturalistic, but the God argued for is not, right? When these natural theologians use math to discuss probabilities of things in the world, right, and connect these probabilities to the existence of God, that's natural. That does not mean that God is natural, because the God they talk about is never defined mathematically. And in fact, their probabilistic arguments are often pseudo-mathematical themselves. So, what about Tipler's God? Frank Tipler was a physicist, still is a physicist, published this book, Physics of Immortality, in the 90s. And Tipler says God, his omega point, is a self-programming universal Turing machine with a literal infinity of memory, basically a universal computer with infinite memory, and it's accelerating. It can perform infinitely many operations in any finite time, right? You perform the first operation in half a second, the next operation in a quarter of a second, the next one in an eighth of a second, a 16th of a second, 1/32nd of a second. And so by that kind of Zeno progression, you can compress infinitely many operations into any unit of finite time. And so this is an extremely powerful kind of Turing machine. It's actually more powerful than a classical Turing machine because of the acceleration. Tipler's God is mathematically well defined. Therefore, if naturalness is mathiness, then Tipler's God is a natural God. In fact, it's a very physical God, according to Tipler. Tipler himself says theology, as far as he's concerned, is a part of physics. So, if Tipler's God were to exist, Turing machines are just computers. They're natural things. If his God were to exist, it would be natural. But watch out. Naturalness does not imply existence. If you want an argument for the existence of Tipler's God, you're going to have to come up with a lot of other arguments. And in fact, it's almost certain that Tipler's God does not exist. You might also ask, well, if there were an accelerating infinite Turing machine, why would that be God? That would be another good question too. But here we're only dealing with the issue of naturalness. So what's the difference? Natural things have mathematical models. Supernatural or non-natural things lack mathematical models. And that's our slogan, naturalness equals mathiness. Again, be careful, naturalness does not imply existence, and conversely, non-naturalness does not imply non-existence. Those are separate things. Here, the only claim that's made is if you look at science and you look at non-science, you see naturalness is mathiness. This is a simple observational test. Look at a book that talks about bleams. I don't know what bleams are. I have no idea, just made it up. If the bleams are described mathematically and the math is used properly, that is, it's not used as graffiti or decorations or Rorschach symbolism or pseudo-math, then the bleams are natural. Otherwise, the bleams are not natural. You don't have to believe anything about whether mathematical objects exist or not. You don't have to even know anything about mathematics except to distinguish between pseudo-mathematics and genuine math. You just have to try to see, are the bleams defined by equations? Are they defined by mathematical structures? Are there mathematical models of bleams? If so, then the bleams are natural. If not, they're not natural. This has been some ideas from spiritual atheism from my book Believing in Dawkins, which discusses some of these ideas. And Believing in Dawkins is published by Palgrave Macmillan. You can learn more about it at my website. And you can learn more about me at my website. Thank you very much.